Hi, Addison. Hi, Hattie. Welcome. Good to have you guys here. While these are open and free events, they are also generally attract kind of small audiences. So one of the nice things today is that we'll probably get to have a nice small group. And I'll tell you a little bit about how the session will work in a second. Hello, Elaine. Hello, Nola. Let me know what your which part Nolarina. I like Nolarina. That's a pretty name if that's your full first name. Hi, so good to hi Caroline. Good to have you guys here. So because these sessions have been tending to run small, I have been running them as open Q&A sessions. So my hope today is that everyone can ask at least one of their most pressing GRE questions, maybe more, depending on time and people and how involved your questions are. And then I will, at the beginning of our session today, I'll collect everybody's questions, and then I will try to improvise a structured lesson in which I answer all of the questions. And usually I can do it, and it's kind of fun. And my hope is that everyone can leave with at least a couple little nuggets that will save you time and money in your GRE preparation process. My name is Kat. I obviously am a GRE teacher. I have been here at Manhattan Prep for, oh gosh, 8.5 years now. I started in 2015. And I've been teaching pretty much my whole adult life, actually, since I started college. That was my very first job in college, was teaching. I love teaching. I love helping people kind of change and grow and discover new things. My secret is I don't love these tests, but I like helping people overcome them so that they can go forward and do the more exciting things that they want to do in graduate school and in life beyond that. Um, Today, if we'll probably do some problems, we'll sort of see where everyone is at in their studies to decide what problems we're going to do. But if we do, they'll be drawn from this book. This is a slightly older cover, but this is a great resource. So if anyone is new, and in a moment, I'm going to want to find out a couple more things about where everyone is at with their studies. But if you are new and you're thinking, what books do I need to get? The first book that you should get is the ETF. They're the people who make the GRE official guide, because that has real former GRE questions in it. So it's our best resource for knowing what's likely to be on the actual current official test. And then I would get this book, because it's just all the practice problems you'll need, you know? I think if someone comes to me and they say I've done everything in the 5-pound book and I'm still not where I want to be, it's usually some kind of issue with like the way they're studying, or with maybe like a test anxiety, stuff like that. That's often a big issue with GRE. But this really could be those could be all the books that you need for this process. That's going to be, I think, more than enough practice problems. So that's my 2 book recommendations. And now, what I would love to know from all of you, if you could share in the chat. You can chat just to me, or ideally to everyone, because if you're comfortable with it, because I think it's kind of nice to see where everyone is at, or to me if you're not comfortable. Let me know, one, where are you today geographically? I am in Brooklyn, where I live with my dog, and um, sometimes with my partner, and with a lot of plants. I have like many house plants. I love plants. And where are you in your GRE process? And so share those things in the chat. And then just for a moment, think about after you've done that, and I'm going to collect these questions in a moment, sort of separately. But think about, what is one ask for today's session? You know, your most burning GRE question, or the biggest issue you're encountering in your studies. Can be a specific topic, it can be sort of broad existential issue, whatever you would like. So first, I'd love to get a little intro from everyone. Oh, yay! We're another Brooklyn person. Hooray. Um, awesome. 5 months away. Ooh, great. I love it. 5 months is such a good timeline. That's so nice. Awesome. Oh, North Carolina. Nice. There was this huge like relocation of a lot of my Manhattan Prep colleagues from New York to North Carolina in like the last 5 years. So I occasionally get to go down and visit friends. Chelsea, oh, our office used to be in Chelsea. I used on West 25th. When I taught all in person. These days I only teach online, but when I did all my work in person, I taught in Chelsea. I was up in here yesterday, in Chelsea yesterday. I went to Buffalo Exchange. Yay. Oh, no worries. No worries, no Lorena. Yay. Oh my gosh, we're all in NYC. I love it. And North Carolina, the NYC of the South. Cool. All right. So a couple of folks, 4 months, 5 months. Great. Just starting. I love this. And I love these longer timelines too, right? I think a common misconception, my work this year, I think, is to dispel this common misconception that GRE prep should be done in 3 months. I think, my experience is like 4 to 8 months tends to be more typical for folks timelines. So I love it. I love seeing folks who have lots of time. Sam, welcome. We're just doing quick intros because we have a smaller group. So I'm asking everyone to share, where are you today? Where are you in your GRE process? Cool. Great. This is great. Oh my gosh, Elaine. Good morning. um, I'm glad this is late enough that it's at least a sort of reasonable morning hour for you, or late enough in my time zone. Awesome. Yeah, that's such a challenge, Elaine. And my guess is other folks are going to relate to that. So, what I would love to do now, once you've introduced yourself, the next thing that I would love to know from everyone is we are going to do um I'm calling it Choose Your Own Adventure because I loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books. I'm a older millennial, I guess. So I loved those books when I was a kid. So that's what I'm calling it. But basically, what's your question? What's your concern? I'm going to gather them. I'm going to think for a second, and then I'm going to take us through some kind of organized response to everyone's questions. So Elaine has a great one, which is a really common um, challenge, which is how do you prep when you have a really demanding job? Many folks are in that boat. I'd say probably more of my students are in that boat than not. So I have a bunch of thoughts about ways that you can be clever about that. Um, cool. Yeah. All right. So weekday prep with a demanding job, sort of I'm gonna add like 1A, kind of getting started on a good foot. You have a demanding job, you want to be getting this process off to a good start. um what are you going to do? Cool. All right. So everyone who hasn't either introduced, if you haven't introduced yourself, please do say hi in the chat, and then please ask your question. You get one ask at least. Sometimes if we don't have enough, we'll go deeper, but oh gosh, and then someone else had a question that I think strategy practice first learning content. Yes, that kind of dovetails with this getting started theme. Actually, those two I think are going to go together really nicely. Great. In 2 days. Um, cool. Sort of concerns for new test format. I'm gonna start. So Sam, I'm gonna probably start with your concerns. What should you do in your last 2 days? What do you want to have top of mind when taking the test? And then once I've answered that for you, and maybe any other little questions you have, I would say my best advice is to then kind of drop off and get some rest. So let me give you what I think are the most important tips. I'll start with yours, the most important tips for the last 2 days before your test. And then you're welcome to stick around as I sort of go back to like the beginning of the process with the newer folks, but you're also welcome to sort of get what you need and then go rest. Yeah, because I think that's, really the best thing that you can do in the next 2 days is try to take it easy. My biggest piece of advice for taking the test. What is my biggest piece of advice? Ooh, I might have to do yours last, Nalini, because that's what gonna make me think. That's a challenge. What is my biggest piece of advice? Um, ooh, yeah. Math anxiety and retraining math brain. That's a great one too. Awesome. Norina, I'm gonna divide yours. I'm gonna give you probably two answers. A is gonna be sort of in preparing, and then B is gonna be while you take the test. And I think that's I'll sort of cheat so I don't have to think of just one. I'm gonna give you two. uh cool. And then um pros and cons of paper version paper uh there Elaine, is there a paper version that's offered in Indonesia? Because I have never the paper like a paper physical version of the test is something that like I feel like is an urban legend. Yeah, I have never seen anyone find a paper test, right? I think in theory there was one that was administered in places that didn't have like a testing facilities. Um, but I've never seen it, so I don't know. That's a really great question. You can take it in person or at a testing center. Is that maybe what you're thinking of? Yeah. In person where you do your scratch work on paper. Let me know and we'll address that. If you do, if you do find a physical paper version of the test, I would love to know, but yeah, it's vanishingly rare. I've never in my many years seen someone find one. But I can talk about in-person versus testing center, and that will involve a component of like, do you do your scratch work on a whiteboard? Do you do your scratch work on paper? Cool. All right. I think we've got um I usually don't have people talk on mic in these because we record them and we post them to YouTube. And I think that there's like having people sort of visible and audible creates maybe some permissions issues. But maybe at the end, if I'll stop recording, and then if you have a question that's easier, it's easier for us to chat for a second, we could do that. So technically, yes, folks can unmute, but I tend to shy away from doing it because they're going to go on YouTube. Um, I have made exceptions to that though in the past. Cool, but please, yeah, please do like as I'm talking, if other questions come to mind, if something I say isn't clear, let me know. And then the final thing I'll say is that I am actually, never mind. I'm not. I was going to say something that's not actually true. But yeah, we'll start with this. And then please, again, we have a small group. I want to make sure everyone's questions get answered. So please don't be shy about jumping in if anything I say isn't clear or um, there's this funky little glitch in Zoom where I have to restart the whiteboard twice if I want to use the text tool. Don't know why. So here are our questions for today. I'm going to start just by talking about what to do if you are taking the test in 2 days. And then we'll back up and we'll talk about other stuff going from the beginning. Number one, don't cram. So in general, my rule of thumb is there is a 2-week cutoff for new material. So when you get to 2 weeks from your test date, that's a good time to say, I'm gonna put down, trying to cram in a bunch of vocabulary, new math, and I'm just gonna focus on strategy and rest. I cannot overstate the importance of doing your best, right? We all have a lot of constraints that probably make this difficult, coming back to the demanding jobs as well. But doing your best to be physically, mentally, emotionally well and sort of energized when you go to take the test. It can make a huge difference positive and negative, and I've seen both happen a lot. So do that. The day before, make sure that you prepare what you need, right? This maybe seems like obvious, but I think it's worth saying. So day before, if you're taking it at home, get your space set up, get your erasable surface. So for folks who are taking the test at home or who might take it at home, you'll use like a little whiteboard like this. I have a little story. I'll tell a little story about Thanksgiving in a minute. So I took the GRE last Thanksgiving, and I'll show you my not. I did all the wrong things. So prepare what you need, get that set up, get your space set up. Make sure that you have like the ETS software downloaded. If you're going to a test center, get your bag packed, plan what time you'll leave, plan how you'll get there. Um, leave extra time, but not so much extra time that you're arriving like an hour early and have a lot of time to kind of sit around and stew. Um, I apologize. I'm getting over a little cold, so there's a non-zero chance I'm going to have to eat a cough drop while we're doing this. And I'm sorry if that kind of sound really, I know some people are sensitive to those sounds, so I apologize, but it's probably better than me coughing. So prepare what you need. And then, rely on a backlog of sleep. The night before probably isn't going to be great. That's okay. Don't let that stress you out. And then I would really plan your day of routine too, um, nothing you don't normally do. And then, some time to kind of, whether it's exercise or meditation or talking to a friend, whatever it is, something centering on the day, and then a little warm up of easy problems, maybe like 3 to 5 easy problems you can do, just so that the very first GRE problem you do that day is not the very first problem that you're seeing on the test. So do that, have that planned. Make sure you have a snack, relatively close. The test now is 2 hours without break. If you're doing standard time, if you're doing non-standard time, it's different. But for standard time, 2 hours without break. So just be mindful of your of the liquids that you consume. This has been a recurring issue for students, so I think it's good to say something about it. If you're going to a test center, plan layers, right? Like maybe it's too climate controlled, maybe it's not climate controlled enough, things like that. So just sort of troubleshooting the little physical irritations. Um, Day of, just be prepared for bureaucracy, right? So, if you're taking it at home, they're going to ask you to take your computer and show the room that you're in, and sometimes they want you to move. You can have, like, I've taken the test with like little pencils and a glass of water and things like that on my desk, but I probably would not and did not take the test in this room I'm in now, because I have tons of writing. Like I have these I'm a writer, so I have these big storyboards with like note cards on them everywhere. So I would not do it, you want to do it in a room where there's not like a bunch of written things on the walls. Something to think about, and then you're going to have to hold up your phone and show them the screen, hold up your erasable surface, show them that. It can be a little slow. They can be a little clunky, the interface. So just be prepared for minor irritations. Right? Sometimes you go to the center, the people are cranky, they're loud, there can be things that go wrong. Sometimes they're lovely and wonderful and warm, you just don't know. Sometimes there might be a line, sometimes not. So just sort of brace yourself, especially if those kinds of things, like bureaucratic things really bug me. So I try to be, I try to just remind myself I'm going to have to be a little patient and calm. And, I like to breathe, and I like to take time to kind of roll my shoulders and, do what you can to just, when there's bureaucratic delays, be centered rather than letting it make you more anxious. And then while you are taking the test, I think the two things, I don't want to overload you with stuff, Sam, but I think the two things while you are actually taking the test: one, do not aim for 100%, right? Let things go. So it is okay to strategically, in fact, it is probably better to strategically not do a couple questions here and there and use that time to get other things right. For most people, that's in quant. Sometimes that's in verbal. You probably know where the timing is tighter for you. So don't, even if you're aiming for a super high score, right? Even if you're aiming for 165, do not go into that test with the mindset that you are going to solve every single problem, because there's going to be at least one problem in each section that is just not a good use of your time. So I'm trying to rebrand those problems as like low value problems, right? Like problems that you're investing time in is unlikely to yield results for you. And it's so much better to sacrifice one problem than to get really stubborn about it and lose a bunch. So be willing to let things go, and then do not trust your assessment of how it's going. That is my other, really, really tried and true piece of advice for test day is, most of us, myself included, right? This is my job and I've done it for a long time. And I will say, like, my sense of how things are going was not great for years. Now it's been so long that I kind of know how things are going. But for me, for many years, if I were going to take a test I was less familiar with, like the GMAT or the LSAT, or for anyone that I work with, just if you think it's not going well, don't, just try to let that go and keep doing your best. If you think it's going great, try to let that go and just keep doing your best. That don't try to guess what adaptive section you're in. Things like that are just gonna increase the chances you're gonna kind of spiral. So those are my little pieces of advice for 2 days before. Sam, if you have other questions, concerns, specific things I haven't answered, let me know. And if I've given you what you need, that's great. And feel free to drop off at any time. So that's my spiel for folks who are taking the test in 2 days. Minimize this. And I minimize this. I've been teaching on Zoom for so many years, and even now, some days. All right, I'm gonna just delete this and start fresh. Yeah, yep, I can talk about the new format. Absolutely. So, new test. This is and this is good because I have some folks here who are new too. So this will be good for all of us. So here's the new test, new test format. We begin with one essay. It is the issue essay. This is the agree or disagree essay. And it takes 30 minutes. Then you will see 4 multiple choice sections. There will be 1 quant. There will be a first quant section with 12 questions, a first verbal section with 12 questions. And you don't know which you'll get first, right? You might get quant first, you might get verbal first. Then there will be a second, and again, you don't know the order, a second quant section with 15 questions and a second verbal section with 15 questions. And this is going to be a moment where I embarrass myself because I can't remember the exact timings of the sections off the top of my head. Because it's weird, right? Something that I noticed, in the first quant section, you're gonna see like 5 quantitative comparison, 2 problem solving, just sort of normal math, 3 data interpretation, and then another 3 problem solving, I think. So that's how the different math formats break down. If you are new, don't stress too much about the names of problem types. You'll get up to speed with that. And then in the second quant section, so that's quant 1, and then in quant 2, you're going to see 5 QC and then just 10 problem solving. So a couple of things that I think are important if you're coming from the long to the short format. One is having the longer second section is existentially hard, I found, when I took it. Because I was sort of like, oh, great, that 12 was so fast. And then the fact that when I was tired, I had to do something a little bit longer, it was fatiguing. And that was, that was a psychological challenge I hadn't really anticipated. Also, not just having that 10 problem solving in the second quant, it's kind of easy to get a little bit more adrift in that. So managing time and energy in the second quant section is particularly tricky. Second quant is trickier for time management. And then in verbal, I think there's like 3 text completion, 2 reading comp, maybe 3 reading comp, some amount of reading comp, then there's sentence equivalent, then there's more reading comp. And they're both like that. They both have that alternating structure. I'm so sorry that I can't remember the exact numbers. It's been a lot of change after a long time with an old format. So I will look that up when I have a minute, or you can probably look that up just as quickly as me online. But I will say it feels like a lot more sentence equivalents, right? So I feel like it's weighted more towards sentence equivalents than text completion now in the verbal. That's one big difference. So the verbal is like more sentence equivalents. And then quant, there's less graphs, right? The graphs feel like a much smaller portion of the test now. So I think that's good news on graphs because most people don't like them. Person by person on sentence equivalents. Some people like it more, some people don't. Oh, Hattie, yes, thank you. Hattie's got us the timing. So 18 minutes for verbal 1, 23. See, these are impossible to remember. It used to be like 30 and 35. It was so easy. I'm gonna have to make flashcards for myself for my next class. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that, like, especially that 26-minute second quant section, it just felt rough to me. It felt hard. So just when you hit the second quant section, I think just like fortitude and digging your heels a bit. So that was, and then I felt overall for me, it was easier to have it be shorter. It felt like a lighter experience. It felt like less struggle. I felt less fatigue, less awful afterwards. So I think overall the short format is a win. I think the one last thing to keep in mind with it is that it does, it is less forgiving of small errors. So just something to be mindful of if you're like me and you tend to make small errors, be careful about that. Cool. Last thing I want to, because I want to get into this question also. My biggest piece of advice for while you take the test. My biggest piece of advice for while you take the test is if you start to spiral, get in your head, things are going not well, whatever it is, look away, close your eyes, deep breath. It's better to take 10 seconds to stop and reset and reorient and come back than it is to just keep pushing on frantically and having things accrue. And I see that's one of the biggest reasons why I see, students who are well prepared and have demonstrated like that they can score at their target score, not score their target score, is because, they get a couple tricky questions at the beginning and it throws them, and then they start to the bad momentum instead of the positive momentum accumulates. Oh, and that's my one other tip is be willing to skip the first question. If that first quant question doesn't look good, you don't do it. Go start off on a good foot. Go to the second, go to the third. You can always go back. But if you start off with something where you're hitting your head against the wall, yeah. Cool. All right. Ooh, memorizing vocab. Okay, so now I think that's Hattie, I wish I could answer that question. Hattie asked, how many do you need to get right in both section 1 quant and verbal to move on to the harder second section? We don't know. ETS won't tell us. I can probably make something up, but I don't, it's not something I'd stand by, so I'm not going to. Yeah, no, ETS isn't gonna help you. What do you mean? ETS to be transparent or helpful? That's crazy. Love you, ETS. Thank you. Um, all right. Yes, and vocab. We can talk about vocab too. I'm gonna put that on my list. Vocab might get like a brief mention at the end, but also in other free prep hours. There's a lot of these free prep hours posted to YouTube, and I talk about vocab in pretty much every one that I do, and then there's some that I think are explicitly about vocab. So I'll give you a couple quick tips tonight, but I would go check out the archive on YouTube. It's a really great resource. There's like years of these. They cover every topic, and they're free. So that's the other like good, not secret, but I think underutilized free resource. All right, cool. Let's talk about how do you do this when you have a tough job, and how do you kind of get started on a good foot? So I'm going to talk about sort of stages of preparation, and I'm going to then kind of get into practice. So I'm going to get into these questions now that are more related to beginning. That are more related to beginning. And then we'll go from there. And I think this is also gonna come in a little bit to this. So I think that there's 3 stages of preparing for this test. Stage 1 is, mastering the content. So this is where I am building a solid foundation in math, knowledge, and mechanics, so that my algebra, my arithmetic, my geometry, I'm memorizing, I'm doing drills, I'm learning or relearning, from a book, from a video. There's a lot of good free and inexpensive resources for this stuff out there. But I'm really getting comfortable just with the math, not even so much with the math in a GRE context, right? But just with that core math, because I will say, and this is an important place to take your time. Sometimes especially if I have students who haven't done math in a long time, have a lot bad past experiences with math, have a lot of math anxiety, which is like the bulk of my students. So if that's you, it's most of us, me included. I had a terrible time with math at school. I still have nightmare. I don't, but like well into my 30s, I had nightmares about high school math. Then I went back to therapy, and now I don't have those nightmares anymore. But I'm really sympathetic to this because I've lived it. So sometimes that's a month or 6 weeks or sometimes even 2 months where I'll say like, let's just get that stuff super solid, when I have the luxury of like a long time horizon with a tutoring student set. We'll spend a lot of time on that, and give yourself a few weeks on that. um and this can also be building vocabulary, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of some things you can do for each of these things. Building vocabulary, this could also be sort of building reading skills if that's something that you need. And these are the things that can be a little slower, require a little patience, but are absolutely trainable. I'm not going to talk a ton about building reading skills. I have talked about them in the last couple free prep hours I've done. So those are going up on YouTube now, and you can find them there. And that's a whole other, I love thinking about reading. So there's a lot of stuff about that. But in terms of the math anxiety, retraining math brain, I would get get an app. And I have a suggestion. Finally, Duolingo has an adult math program. And I love Duolingo. I think the learning science they use is super good. It's very gamified. It's very addictive. I'm learning Scottish Gaelic. That's just what I decided to do this winter. Don't know why. But we do teach the math, yeah. But I don't think that there's enough time in the class itself to do all the like practice that you need to do, right? So we teach, I'd say that in a given course, I can teach about like 50 to 60% of the math. For if I, in a perfect world, I would love to build a course where I could teach like 100% of math in a way that could accommodate, people who, everyone from like someone who's, loves math to someone who's just starting out with math after a long time away, right? But I think that course would be 6 months long, so I don't think it's a marketable product. I'm always like pitching it, but I don't think anyone's gonna give me the chance to do it. Yeah. Um, so what you have to do, right? And this is a little irritating, but this also, I'm going to try in my classes this year to incorporate this and to give some specific guidance on this. But I would look at the official guide and I would see what math is fair game. And then I would go through and go into Duolingo and see. And then you also have to gauge, right? What do you need? Arithmetic is something most of us don't use, right? So getting arithmetic, like the things I think I would focus on to start: arithmetic, fractions, and percents. That's a place where people often just the underlying concepts and drills, and algebra are the things you want really, really, really solid, and then knowing the geometry rules. And that may be, this may be 2 weeks, this may be 6 weeks. It depends a lot on where things are starting. But I like Duolingo. Khan Academy can be good. I worked on making for Manhattan Prep like an asynchronous math course that's also included in our sort of live courses, that I think is still pretty solid. So we do teach the math, but we can't always teach as much math as people need, just because there's limited time in which to do everything. So I see when I teach one of our courses, that the way I see it is like, I want to give you all the tools and knowledge that you're going to need to be successful, but you might still need some extra time to kind of practice, rehearse, reinforce those, and beyond the end of the class. Is the way that I kind of see it. And then each of us is a little different as a teacher. But those are the core things, right? And getting flashcards are great for that, getting super solid with that. And then stage 2, these don't have to be like first this, then this, but once math is getting comfortable, right? Like, okay, my algebra is pretty good now. Stage 2, and this is probably where more of our class time focus is process and problem solving. So this is where you're going to be GRE. Yes. Oh, it's 4 o'clock coming. Yeah. You won't necessarily see all of those formats in data interpretation, but those are the formats that are fair game for data interpretation. Yep. Cool. So this is where you're going to be doing more GRE problems. This is where, learning a consistent process for each problem type. And this is going to be often untimed practice. So this is super important. And stages 1 and 2 are often happening kind of together or overlapping, but I think it's good to distinguish, like, this is the time I'm spending just building my core math skills up, and this is the time I'm spending on GRE like problems to practice these specific processes. Because that's one of the things about the test that I think is so important to know and remember, is that it is not really a math test. They're using these math concepts. You have to know the math. It has to be solid, right? So I'm not saying that math's not a huge part, right? But they're using the math to test other types of problem solving, time management, self-management skills. So this is where also taking the time to really have a clear understanding of the process for each of the question types. For quantitative comparison, there's a process. For problem solving, there's a process. What MPRO calls discrete quant. Everyone has a different name for it. And data interpretation, there's a separate process. And that's a lot of class too, when I teach courses, is on that. And then stage 3 is going to be strategy and timed practice. And that I think is going to come a little bit later. So in our classes, in any kind of process that I'm in with someone, I'll usually say, let's take 4 to 6 weeks to build math foundations, to learn good problem solving processes, to learn for both verbal and quant, right? And to build vocabulary. And then at the end of those 4 to 6 weeks, we'll do a practice test. It probably won't go well. That's okay. That's normal. That practice is usually kind of rocky. We'll sort of look at that. We'll see how it goes. We'll talk about it. We'll do some diagnosis, and then we'll shift to a mix of continuing to build skill through untimed process and to build strategy through timed set work. And that can maybe last again, 2 to 8 weeks, depending on the person. And then after that, eventually you'll get to a point where you're like, I know the processes, my problems, all I really need is just the strategy and the timed rehearsal. And then it'll be almost entirely timed work. That could be like the last 2 weeks. Sometimes that goes a little bit long. Sometimes if someone has a really high anxiety, like test anxiety, for example, that last phase of the timed work and troubleshooting can go a little bit longer. But that's how I would roughly expect the process to go. Take a little time, make your math flashcards, learn the facts. Vocabulary, I think apps are great. A lot of my students use the Magoosh app. They really like it. If you really want to get into it, look up something called the Lightner box. I'm pretty sure there's a past free prep hour on it. So that's my brief minute on vocab. The other thing I always want to remind people of with vocab, no more than 50 words per week. Just, to go beyond that is to get into the realm where you're seeing a bunch of stuff, but not really remembering it. And so it's better to do a little bit less, but to keep it up consistently. Thank you for being my TA, Hattie. I really appreciate it. Cool. All right. I looked at that doc and I was like, why? Which of my colleagues did not send this to me? And then it was like, they probably did, and I missed it in my email. So that's the timeline that I would expect. Roughly, right? And again, it's different person to person. Some people do this, some people it might be 4 weeks of one, 4 weeks, and then 4 weeks the next. But I would sort of see those stages ahead of you. Related to this, I think, is the question of what to do if you have a demanding job. Last thing I'll say actually about strategy practice versus learning content. You don't have to have 100% of the content down. No, you never do, right? We're aiming for 80%, right? We're aiming for like 100% of 80% is what I like to say. You don't, if probability combinatorics, most people aren't going to need those. My new rule this year is unless you're scoring 160 or above in quant, we're not going to talk about probability and combinatorics because they're, rare. I didn't see a single one when I took the test. I know that combinatorics is not important because I'm bad at it, right? Like, and I know this because I do these problems all the time and I can see that I'm not good at them. But I always score, I always score 160, 167, 168, 169 quant, no matter what. So I know they aren't important. So that's, if anyone's really worried about probability and combinatorics, that's my other 2024 mission, is to get people not to worry about those things. So you don't have to, you don't have to get all the content down before you shift to strategy. But I do think that there's an issue that happens where if the content is too shaky and you start timed practice, and I think you'll have a sense of this, right? You'll start timed practice and you'll be like, oh gosh, I'm just not executing the problem, so I'm not remembering the facts. It can make things worse. So sometimes what happens, I see people try to rush into the strategy component and they end up taking more time overall because they sort of end up in this loop of like doing too much time practice without the foundations. and not thoroughly building the foundation. So if you can be a little patient with yourself and take a little time and say, and we have the advantage of it being January and most deadlines aren't going to be till September. Not true for everyone, but for many of us, that will probably be true. So you have this great advantage that you can afford to be a little patient. And to that end, and to the subject of what are you going to do if you have a really tough job, right? Students who are in consulting and finance and all have like a lot of demanding like personal and family commitments and things like that. So what I think is super, super important to keep in mind is that, as with kind of many improvement and learning processes, consistency is more important than intensity. So I would say, put in 45 minutes. Not everyone agrees with me on this, but I stand by it and I've seen it work a lot, to 1 hour a day, 5 to 6 days a week. No marathon sessions on weekends, except for your practice tests. Obviously, you'll be doing practice tests, every few weeks. And just budget for that and see how that goes. Do that for 8 weeks, see where you're at. But be really disciplined about the consistency. That's the trick. It does a lot more. And the reason why this does a lot more is when we learn, on average, we need to see things 5 times over weeks. Yeah, I would say, 1 hour a day on the weekend, right? 1 hour on Saturday, 1 hour on Sunday, one on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, then Friday off or something like that. If you wanted to, you could do like an hour and a half on weekends. But again, I think that's, and I'm going to tell you why. I have a really good like scientific reason for this. One is burnout. Burnout is if we're thinking like this is a task we're going to be fitting into an already demanding life over the course of 4 to 8 months, like we need a sustainable routine, which means there has to be rest. However, the other reason why it's better to do consistency over intensity is we need to see things 5 times over weeks, and we need to repeat. Because as soon as you step away, you immediately start forgetting. So if I spend 4 hours on Saturday and then I'm really burnt out and I don't come back until the next Saturday, that's only one repetition. The amount of decay that happens in between those two repetitions is going to be a lot. So it starts to feel like you're climbing, you're Sisyphus, like rolling the rock up the hill, and then it rolls almost all the way back down, and then you're pushing it up again in those 4 hours, as opposed to like you push it up a little way, it slides a little, you push it up a little more, it slides a little, right? So that's why the consistent hour produces like more lasting, more effective results in a learning process. It's the same thing, like, right, it's like going to the gym. You got to go to the gym a few times a week or something. If you just, I want to believe that I can just go to the gym 1 day a week and like do a ton of really intense lifts, but that's not going to work. I've got to go with that frequency and that repetition. So that's a big part of why, something you might think about is like Saturday 1.5 hours of learning difficult things, right? Learning a concept you haven't seen before, haven't seen in a long time, approaching a new type of problem, approaching difficult, right? Like heavy brain work. Sunday, 1.5 hours of learning difficult things. Monday, maybe you're off because it's the start of the week, you're tired, you want to just come home, get some rest. Tuesday, 45 minutes, 15 minutes of vocab, 15 minutes of math drills, 15 minutes of problems. And that's Tuesday to Friday. And then I hate that I'm going to say this, but in the morning before work, it's just, I'm not a morning person. I don't like that that's what I'm saying, but I've just really seen that that's what works, because your brain is fresher and it's easier to protect the time. So even if starting out this week, you're like, I'm just going to get up half an hour earlier and do 30 minutes. I did that with a student this fall, right, who's having a lot of trouble, where it was like just get I had really bad job situation. So like get up 30 minutes earlier. She'd send me a little text at 8. I'd give her a thumbs up. She, at 8:30, she'd send me her takeaway for the day, and that was it. And it was just half an hour a day. And she did that, and that worked. It took longer than she would have liked, but she got there in the end. Because that's what she had capacity for. So I think that's the other thing, is just as you're thinking about a schedule, work within your capacity, be honest about what that is, slow and steady. This is a tortoise and the hare situation for sure. And then start smaller and build. So if you're just kind of starting out, start with 30 minutes a day. Once you can do that for a week, then you can do 40 minutes a day. And then, you know, I think the other issue that I see is people have a lot of energy in week 1 and they're there for an hour a day, but then by week 5, they're not there at all, or they're there for 2 hours a day, but by week 5 they're not there at all, and that's also where things get tough. So patience, steadiness, not rushing, a little bit day by day. And that's kind of that's really just all recommendations that are built out of many, just observing a lot of processes over the years with tutoring students, with class students. And it's also based out of my own practice in my life, of any time I've tried to learn something new or create change or integrate a new habit, or anything like that. Like, this is what I find works for me as well. So I do practice what I teach, and then I always teach out of what um, I observe. And of course, there's always exceptions too. So I will tell you, these I think are best practices for the bulk of people that I see, but there's always going to be someone who needs something a little bit different. And I think at this stage, actually, when you're just starting out, I think the most important thing is build the habit. And then the content of the time can kind of come bit by bit, but just showing up is, my friend said this the other day. His yoga teacher told him something, and I liked this, that the hardest part about yoga is just getting to the mat. And I think that the hardest part about preparing for the GRE is just getting yourself to sit down and do the GRE every day. No one's paying you to do it. It's not always, it can be fun. I think that you can get to a place where like the problem solving is fun, the math can be fun, learning what you can be fun, or at least not painful. But for so many of us, there's a lot of pressure on this task. There's bad experiences with math or with standardized tests. So don't sell yourself short on the emotional hurdles too, that can be barriers. And just get there and sit down. And if you're new, that's a great place to start, and then build from there. And I think that's my biggest piece of advice for preparing, is slow and steady. And my other favorite like little self-helpy thing that I love is, my other piece is uh day-to-day realism. Gosh, I really don't remember anything about triangles. Algebra is really hard for me. And then cool, that's fine. I embrace that. I see that. I try to look at my challenges without judgment. So day-to-day realism without judgment, long-term optimism. I have seen people who have never been happy with the standardized test score, show up, put in the work over time, and end up with, 164, 165. Like I've seen people go from 145 to 165. It took a long time, and a lot of hard work. I'm not going to undercount that, but I really, really believe, and I really try to realize this in my teaching, and this is sort of the ethic from which I teach, that anyone can get the score that they need on these tests with time and effort correctly applied. And I think, just keeping that in your mind, like, I'm even on these days when it really doesn't feel like I'm going to get there, because it feels like the math is endless, and it feels like the problems are crazy, and it feels like the timing is crazy. You can, and you will. You just have to stick with it with patience. And the math is finite in the end. It can feel overwhelming at the start, but there is an end to it. Um, it's not endless. So that's my self-help moment for today. In terms of most useful things that I think are most important for preparing. All right, I think I've done these, done this. I've done a little bit of vocab. Math anxiety, it's stories, right? So that's the other thing that I'll say about the math anxiety. Or if there's something, there's other places where you might feel anxious about the test in general, just start, if math, for anxiety in general, start with noticing. Maybe keep a list. What triggers your worst thoughts and feelings? What are your triggers? Just observe. That's it to begin. Then, once you're starting to get a sense of observing, think about what can interrupt that. What is a new story? So I'm a big believer in affirmations. If okay, I see I can't, I sometimes look at a problem and I think I can't do this, I hate this. And then I will take a deep breath and I will literally say to myself in my head, I can figure this out one piece at a time. Even the hardest problems are just a series of small steps. So that's the other thing too, is like allow yourself to do things one step at a time. I think a big thing that I see with math anxiety, or with folks who've had, but even, I have students who come in and tell me they're terrible at math and they're not, and they have good math skills, but they have this idea about their math skills that gets in their way. That's really common. And then what happens is they expect themselves to be able to look at a problem and sort of see how to do it all at once because of this fear or this sort of negative self-image around math. And no one can do that. I can't do that. I have to do things step by step and figure things out. I mean, not saying no one can do it, but I can't do it, but I can do GRE. So allow yourself to do things, to figure things out one step at a time. And you don't have to do everything too, so don't let individual problems bully you. It's a bigger question in a lot of ways, but I think these are sort of some of the core things that I've observed are helpful when dealing with that, specifically. And then, just what's my new story, and I'm going to stick with that new story, and I'm just going to gently repeat it to myself. Gentle repetition can change the thought loops that plague us, for sure. And I found that true in my life and in a lot of my students. And then in person versus at a testing center, just know yourself. Will you do better in your home environment? If I were taking this test to score qualify for my job or for school, like I did years ago, I would go to a test center because I'm distractible and my house is distracting. It's noisy, etc. But some of my students, it's more comfortable at home, and centers make them more anxious. So just know yourself. Think about it. Yes, Hattie, I do advise that. And then, a lot of us feel a little bit more comfortable in one area or the other. So you may move into timed practice sooner in quant or sooner in verbal. But to start, allow yourself to get to a place where you are getting, like I'd say like 60% of things correct untimed, you feel reasonably comfortable with your untimed accuracy, then bring in the time pressure. If you have a solid untimed foundation, the timing will go faster, right? So the best way to get fast efficiently is to be good without the clock running. And then, I sort of see it in, untimed, then run a stopwatch and observe how long things take you, and then do time sets. So it's kind of build the skill, observe how much time you're currently taking, then you can adjust and then go into time set work. Yes, Elaine, absolutely. Elaine asked, should you be using the on-screen calculator? Yes. Everyone will have a slightly different practice with a calculator, but I think everyone will need it. So as you practice, notice where your on paper math. Notice they didn't say mental math because you shouldn't be doing anything in your head. It's unreliable and it will make you tired. But notice where your on paper math is slow or makes you anxious, right? Like there's certain types of math that I don't do just because they don't make me feel good when I do them. So for me, decimals, percents, large numbers, some square roots, larger, multi-digit multiplication. These are things that I like to do on the calculator, and I use it more when I'm tired. Yeah. Come co-teach my class, Addie. Yeah, and you definitely practice with that on-screen calculator, and get comfortable with it. It's fun. GRE is so much more fun to teach than to take. I will say that my job is fun, even if the tests themselves are not fun. All right. I think I've done everyone's major questions, and I think that is going to be our session for tonight. We do also, I think some of you are probably already aware of this, but you can come to the first session of any one of our full courses. They're 3 hours, and they'll cover a lot of foundations. They'll recap a lot of the stuff about test format, but they'll also talk about core strategies for some quant and verbal. I am not teaching a course probably for a while. I'm working on developing a different format where there's two 1.5-hour sessions instead. So I won't be teaching one, but my colleagues are really great and you should take class with them. You're so welcome, Madeline. I hope you all have a great night. Sam, if you're still here, good luck in 2 days. Everyone else, patience, slow and steady. You're gonna get there. I do these once a month. Come back, ask more questions. And I will hopefully see you in another session. Have a lovely night. Thanks for asking great questions and being active participants. I appreciate it.